Greetings and welcome to a lecture on functions in JavaScript. Pay no attention to the not showing files. I'm not going to show them. All right, so let's start off with getting a couple of baseline files in here. So I am going to create an index.html file, which will, of course, have our HTML code in it. And I'm just going to real quick get that set up as a baseline HTML document that we can use. Fairly standard, just baseline stuff. Now, the second thing that we're going to do is we're going to create another file, and I am going to call this one code.js. The .js is important. You want to have your JavaScript files have the .js extension on them because that helps web browsers know what type of file this is. Now, why do we want to do this? Why do we want to separate out the code from the HTML? A couple of reasons. One, it makes it easier to maintain. If you need to update the JavaScript, but you don't need to touch the HTML, having the JavaScript file split out from the HTML file makes it safer to update. There's less chance of you accidentally changing something in the HTML file that doesn't need to be changed, and therefore breaking the entire page or potentially the entire site. It also makes for cleaner code, like having all of your code in one place. It just makes it easier to maintain. It's much the same reason as to why we separate out a CSS file. Having all of our CSS in a separate file makes it easier to maintain. It also makes it easier to reuse. By having my code in a separate file, much like having my CSS in a separate file, I can now use this code page or this code file across multiple HTML pages, getting more use out of it than if I had all of the code embedded into the HTML. If that code needs to be repeated across multiple files, yes, it will work, but I've also just created a maintenance nightmare for myself. So that is why we want to put, generally speaking, our code in a separate file. There are some scenarios in which putting the JavaScript directly in the HTML does make sense, specifically if it is a highly one-off, like very specific for this page, you are absolutely certain no one else is going to need to use it. That might be a scenario in which you put the code directly embedded into the HTML itself. Now, how do we link this in? Well, in the head section, we are going to put in a script tag, but this time we're going to give it an src attribute, and we are going to put in the file name. We still want to have a closing script tag. Like, you still need that, even though we're not going to put anything in there. And what that'll do is, while this page is processing, it will import in the JavaScript. And we can see this in action. If I come in here to code.js and I put in alert, this is outside, of functions. Save that. And now we're going to go into live view. So I'm going to right click, open with live server. And something very interesting to note here. I don't see the web page yet. This is being triggered before the web page is fully rendered in. This is important. Not all of the HTML elements exist yet. So be aware of that. That can cause problems depending on what you are doing. I click on OK, and the page finishes loading. So that's the basics of how we import code from a code file into HTML. But now let's take a look at functions. In order to create a function in JavaScript, we use the function keyword, and then we give it a name. Functions follow the same rules as variables do. Alphanumeric, first character must either be an underscore or a letter, and that's it. Those are the rules. Traditionally, you use upper camel case for functions to distinguish them from variables. You then give it a parameter list, just like any other language. In this case, we're not going to pass in any parameters, so we're just going to leave that blank. And then you put in a matching set of curly brackets to indicate what belongs to this function. This is important. JavaScript does not operate like Python. It operates more like Java, although the two languages are completely separate. Do not try to write JavaScript like Java. It doesn't work. But in this aspect, JavaScript needs curly brackets because tabs mean nothing to JavaScript. Now, inside this function, I'm going to put in another alert. Save my code, and then I'm going to switch back over here. And actually, I'm going to completely close the page so we can see the sequencing here. We'll come back to this. So I'm going to right-click on index, open with live server. Again, notice this is outside of functions. Page hasn't rendered in yet. We click OK. And nothing happens, right? The other function doesn't get called. So what's going on here is when you import in the code, it is going to read through and execute, or it's going to read through and run every single line of code in that file. So this alert gets ran. If I had some variables and math equations in here, whatnot, those would also just automatically get ran. But here we're defining a function. Like Python, or Java for that matter, when we define a function, the function doesn't get called. This isn't calling the function. This is defining the function, and therefore it's not being executed. The page is now aware that this function exists, but it hasn't been called. So how do we call it? Well, of course, I could put in a function call here in the JavaScript file, but how do we call it from the HTML file? Because that's what we need to be able to do. We need to be able to tell this HTML file, hey, go do this thing that I defined over in the JavaScript file. And for this first one, we're going to link into the body event of onLoad. Now, there are a lot of these events. I am not going to cover every single one. On W3 Schools, under the JavaScript section, mostly down towards the bottom, you will find this JS HTML section with a list of both the JavaScript HTML document object model, which is important, and JS events. This is where you will go to look up specific events. Is there an event for clicking on something, something starting to load, something finishing loading, something has been changed? Whatever it is, if you want to know, is there an event that I can use for this? Or what part of the document object model do I need to access to be able to do a thing? This is the section you will come to look it up. There's too much here to remember unless you've been doing JavaScript every day for years. So anytime you have a question about the document object model or events, come to this section to look it up. And so returning back over here, we are going to access the onLoad event. So we're going to say onLoad equals. Now, here's something that you are going to have to watch out for. There is no autocomplete. Notice again, if I go through here and I start typing, I'm getting lots of page stuff that are part of the document object model and such. But there's no autocomplete. Visual Studio Code is not capable of reading in this file and going, oh, okay, you're probably trying to reference that function you defined in the JavaScript file. Other IDEs are capable of doing this, but Visual Studio Code is not able to. Now, this is not going to work. If I save this and flip back over to here, I'm not going to get the second message. Oh, what is going on? Now, this is where hitting F12 to go into debug mode is going to matter. Now, by default, debug mode will typically open up in Inspector. So we're going to flip over to the console where we can see any messages that JavaScript has dumped out to the console. And sure enough, uncaught reference error, page load is not defined. So if I come back over here to my code, I can see, oh, I called it page loaded, not page load. So let me fix that. Eagle-eyed amongst you will notice, yes, there's still an error. I'm going to save that. Now, I have noticed that sometimes this can get a little twitchy. It's usually a good idea when working with JavaScript to occasionally either manually hit F5 to reload the page, or sometimes just flat out close the tab that you've been working on and reopen the page using Open with Live Server. But regardless, yeah, I know, I'm still getting unreferenced exception error, page load not defined. Take a moment to think about it. Why am I still getting that error, even though I clearly have a page loaded function? And of course, the answer is capitalization. Remember, JavaScript is case sensitive. Lowercase Bob is not the same name as uppercase B Bob. And so what I need to do is I need to come back through here and fix this to be page loaded. Capital P, capital L. Save that, flip over to Firefox. There's the outside of functions. This is in a function. Now, don't check this box here. And if you do accidentally check it, browsers will usually have some place on here for notifications telling you that you have blocked pop-ups, which in Firefox, actually give me a moment, Firefox is not actually showing me it like I thought it was. Okay, so under normal circumstances, when you're not running off of live server is what's kind of messing these things up right now. You will get a notification with Firefox saying, hey, I blocked a pop-up for you, and you can use that to allow pop-ups. In this particular case, if you do mistakenly check on this and you have blocked pop-ups and still need to have pop-ups show up, just close the live server window and relaunch it, and pop-ups will be back. And notice the onLoad pop-up still hits before the page is rendered. That can be of significance depending on what you're trying to do in your JavaScript method that is being called when the page is loaded. Okay, so fairly basic stuff. We have a function, we can call it. Let's modify things a little bit. What if I wanted to pass a parameter in? Nope, that's fairly easy. So we'll say function hello world string world. Oops, no, not string world. Apologies. Remember, JavaScript is a loosely typed language. You do not need to specify data types. And now I can say alert hello, comma, plus world. So now when this function is called, assuming that we have passed in a string here, it will say hello, comma, and then whatever we passed in. So let's do that. I'm going to put in a line break here, and then I'm going to put in a button. And I'll just have the button label be say hi. Now the button, again, has an event. One of the more onload and onClick and onChange are three of the more common events that you will use. So in the case of button, I am going to say onClick equals hello world world. Save it. And that's right, I had to hit F5 to force the button to reload. So there we go, say hi. And it doesn't work. Oh. Syntax expression, expected expression, got that. So what's going on here? Well, first things first, let's ignore the typo that I had there. That was not actually the problem. Again, to prove this, save this, come back over here. I'm going to reload it just to be certain. Click on it. And okay, yeah, syntax error, unexpected expression, got curly bracket. So the typo was not the error, in case you saw that before I did. Now, what's going on here is that HTML has a specific meaning for the double quotation mark. And so by having the double quotation mark like this, it is saying onClick equals that. So it's saying onClick equals hello world, open parens, and then this portion is just kind of sitting out there orphaned, confusing everything. So that is what's going on. In the case that we need to pass in a string like this, we need to use a single tick mark, a single quote mark to pass in the string. So now it looks like this, button onClick hello world, world. Save that. Come back over here. Reload. Say hi. There we go. Hello world. And also, just so that I get slightly less message spam, I am going to come over here to code.js, and I am going to comment out that outside of function alert, because that doesn't really need to be there. All right, so there's two examples of calling functions, but how can we use JavaScript to alter the page? Because at the moment, these are just kind of party tricks, right? We're causing alert boxes to pop up and annoy the user. In case you're wondering why there's that really fast protection of, hey, do you want to stop this site from sending you pop-up boxes? That used to be one of the absolute banes of like late 90s, early 2000 website design, is that they would like try to trap you on the website by just flooding you with pop-up boxes, trying to get you to click OK when you shouldn't click OK. So that's why you've got such rapid protections on those things, because they really annoyed the entire internet with pop-up boxes. It's also why you don't see them very often in website design anymore, because, well, pretty much everyone from my era really hates the darn things, so we tend not to use them. They're perfectly valid in moderation. Just a little bit of history lesson there. All right, so let's write a function that's going to do something a little bit more. So actually, let's come over here first, and let's set up a paragraph, and I'm going to give it an ID, and that is important. I'm going to call this label. Apparently, I cannot type today. And actually, now that I think about it, let's just go in here. Let's comment out the page load alert. And let's just do a console.log. Page is loaded. Don't really need to have that alert constantly going off. All right, so we've got a paragraph. It has an ID. The ID is important. Remember it, whatever you put in. This is a label. Save this, come back over, look at our page. Reload it. There we go. There's my console message. Page is loaded. And if I click on say hi, that'll still work. And here we go. We have this is a label. So far, so standard. But I want to put a button underneath this that when we click that button, it's going to change the label. Yep. And I haven't written the function yet, but I know I'm going to call it change. Let's do a quick copy on that. Hop over to my code file. So now when I click that button, just like with the hello bird, just like with the hello world button, but instead of displaying an alert, we want to change the HTML document. And this here is one of the most common things you will do in JavaScript. Document.get. And as you can see, there's a lot of gets. There's get element by ID. There's get elements by class name. And get elements by name. Now, why am I being really weird with my pronunciation? Because I want to call attention to the plurality of the word element. You have get element by ID, and you have get elements, plural, by class name, by tag name, etc. Remember, according to HTML standards, only one element in a document should have a specific ID. IDs need to be unique. The page won't fail if you put multiple IDs in, but the standard is IDs are unique. So therefore, if the page is correctly formatted, get element by ID should only ever find a single element in the document. However, name and class name, well, you can, the whole point behind classes is to apply the class tag to multiple HTML elements. And so, of course, this one needs to return an array. Even if there's only one element in the document that has that class, potentially there could be more. And so things like class name, tag name, etc., those gets will return arrays. Element will only ever return the first instance of that ID that it finds, which in theory should be the only ID. So I am going to tell it to get element by ID label. And this is going to return a reference to that specific document element. Again, if you are curious about more on like how exactly are the documents structured, I refer you back to the W3 section where it talks about the HTML DOM or document object model. Next, I'm going to do dot inner HTML. There's actually a lot of things that we can access here. We can access style, all sorts of stuff, but inner HTML is what I want to access. And I'm going to set that to be equal to the label is now changed. So I'm going to go back to here, hit reload to make sure everything's okay. I'm also going to switch over to the inspector so we can see the raw HTML that's powering this page. And realize I've got a typo someplace. Okay, no, and it's not a typo. It was me making a very silly mistake, but it's an easy mistake to make with Visual Studio. Notice that I have a white dot on my tab here. That means I have unsaved changes. That is the one sort of disadvantage. You have to pay very, very close attention when you're working in multiple files, including like if you've got a CSS file, that you have saved all of your files before you go and test. Because unlike any other mode in an IDE, you're not building this. You're not building it like a C++ or a Python or a Java project, so therefore it does not automatically save all files when you hit refresh on the web page. So now that I have my files, my changes saved, there we go. So there's the button on click, and then when I click on this, you can see both the rendered text changes, as expected. And now it says code injected by live server. Now, the inspector can't like dynamically update. It's always going to show this code injected by live server. But as you can see, it is successfully working. And in case you're curious, this is what the script is. This is just the sort of compiled version of the script, basically. Of course, continuing to click on the button doesn't do anything because we just had the one change. So let's recap. If I have an HTML file that I want to import a separate JavaScript file into, I use the script tag, and I provide a source, an src attribute, and I assign it to the file name. Remember to include path information. If this resides in a different path, you need to include the full path information here. For example, if I put in a folder and I move my code into that folder, so now code.js is in demo, I have to make sure that I say src equals demo / code.js. You do not have autocomplete, so make sure that you are paying attention to capitalization. And if for some reason a function is not working correctly, always remember to hit F12, go to the console, and see what kind of output you have to see whether or not there's any uncaught reference errors being thrown. You call a function by using the function name and a set of parentheses, empty parentheses if there's no parameters, or passing in parameters if necessary. If you need to pass in a string, make sure that you use single tick marks if you are inside an HTML page. Otherwise, it gets it confused with a special meaning for the double quotation marks. Looking at the code itself, to define a function, we use the function keyword, followed by the function name, which follows standard variable naming rules. It is traditional to use upper camel case, but it is not required. You then have parentheses indicating the list of variables that are passed in as parameters. It can either be empty with no parameters passed in, or a comma separated list of variable names. Function uses curly brackets to define what belongs to the function, and then you put in lines of code as needed for the function to do what it needs to get done. If you need to modify HTML, you use document, get in the appropriate get, and then .inner HTML to modify that. If you need to do multiple modifications, it is perfectly acceptable to say document.get element by ID, whatever it happens to be. And assign that to a variable. And now I can still access the inner HTML through that variable. Completely acceptable way of doing things. And that is it. So now let's talk about the assignment. So as you've already caught a glimpse of, you're going to be doing a basic menu. So the idea is you're going to have 4 items. You're going to have the buttons to change the values and update the totals. So actually, let's start off with the page. Now, yours does not have to look exactly like this. If you want to get creative and put colors or images in here, knock yourself out. There are a couple of hard requirements, however, that you cannot change. One, the title will be called the menu, and you will have this text centered on the top here. These lines must always be on one line. So you will have the item name. And again, you do not have to call yours this. Like if you want to have 4 different items, feel free to change the names to whatever you want. But regardless of the name, it's going to be on one line. So you will have the item name. The separator here is optional. You will have a minus button. There must be a button. A number. And then a plus button. Clicking on these buttons will cause that number to change. And that will be true for all 4 items. Again, one item name, minus button, number, plus button, item name, minus number, plus, so on, so forth. That will be the pattern for all these items. Then after all of this, you will have this line that says the total is with a $sign, and it will show the current total, which will automatically update as you change these numbers. This value must always display 2 digits for the cents. So the Monster is $4. Pretty cheap for carnival fare Monster, and it'll probably be more like $6. And again, the Monster is $4, and so the total shows, I've got 4 of them, so $16. The cents are there. And again, total is 2050, so it shows it as 2050, not 20.5. Those are the main requirements. Like I said, if you want to get fancy, put images on here, you want to add some additional formatting, change the names, that's fine. Must be on one line. That is the flow layout you are not allowed to change. This must be on one line. And there's 2 main ways that you can do that. I'm not going to say what they are. So that is the assignment. The exact wording here will be up on Blackboard, of course, for you to review. Oh yeah, the thing that I did want to definitely cover on this, the costs are fixed. I need these costs to be fixed so that way I can visually and quickly check to make sure that your totals are correct. So item 1, whatever you decided to call it, $1.25, item 2, $7.50, item 3, $2.25, item 4, $4. You can change the names. Do not change the cost values. These are what the items must cost. And with that, that's all we have for this week. Good luck on the assignment. I'll catch you on the next video.